I don't know if you're going to fail at writing a novel, but I have a pretty good idea of where you're going to fail. At your desk, alone, in the dark, crying in front of your keyboard. I should have stopped that joke in the middle because it wasn't very good. But as it happens, the middle is also the most problematic spot in a novel, and if you're going to fail at writing one, it's probably going to be in the middle. The middle is often the toughest part to write, the hardest part to get the reader engaged in, and also the part of a novel with the fewest rewards. To help you avoid this and other middle-related problems, I'm going to talk about the actual purpose of a novel's middle and give you a few ways to execute on that purpose effectively. So let's get into the middle of things. Middles can be tough to write. They don't have the novelty and intrigue that an opening has, nor do they get the grandiose, climactic resolution and action that an ending usually has. The kind of things required to write an engaging middle are also more challenging from a skills perspective. A novice writer can probably write a somewhat interesting intro and probably a fairly decent conclusion, but writing a middle requires a higher degree of writing skill. Also, if you, the writer, are going to run out of motivational steam, that will usually happen partway through the novel. The initial excitement of a project might keep you going through the intro to your novel, but it's likely that that initial excitement is going to wane, especially as you get towards the middle of the novel, which coincidentally is also a tough part of the novel to write. In the worst case, middles just end up being a delaying game between an opening and an ending. The reader is basically left waiting around for the thing you've probably foreshadowed to happen. You don't want this, and if your novel has a saggy middle, it's probably because of this. The challenge of the middle is one of delaying. We hook the reader onto our story in the opening, we promise them an interesting ending to the conflict that they've become invested in, but we can't just move right to the ending. We have to tell a story that's long enough to be a novel. And this gets to the true purpose of the middle. A well-written middle is one that grows your story. It is about developing the attachments and interests of the reader, not just delaying things until we get to the ending. Growth means progress, and that progress can come in a few different ways. Progress can mean change. If you have a character who is going through an arc, if they are developing in some way, the middle of your novel should show the steps towards that change. This might be the character learning a new skill, slowly becoming more and more proficient as the middle progresses. It might be them developing a relationship with another character. It might be them beginning a slow, self-destructive spiral. Something like a character arc should not be sudden. We don't present a character at the beginning and then have them suddenly become someone else at the end. It's usually a gradual process where the change is slowly demonstrated, and this is done through the middle of the novel. This progress doesn't have to be a character arc. It could be something like a mystery being unraveled. It could be some other kind of plot progression. But generally, showing change in some element either of the characters or of the plot through the middle is one way to make a middle more interesting. Progress can also come in the form of understanding, specifically the reader's understanding. One of the problems with the novels where a conflict gets introduced and then we wait around until the end for it to get resolved is they use up all of their understanding ammunition early on. The reader learns everything they need to learn in the first quarter of the novel, and there's nothing left to learn through the middle. There's a balance between presenting enough information at the outset to get the reader interested and also breadcrumbing enough information throughout the middle to keep them interested and get them more interested. If you leave them completely in the dark, they're not going to be interested because they're not going to know what's going on. But if you deliver too much information too soon, there's nothing left to learn. There's nothing left to discover through the middle of your novel. In this case, the progress through the middle is the reader learning more and more about the story. This could be world building stuff or some conspiracy that your characters are unraveling, or it could just be revealing a character's backstory. I talked about info dumps in a recent video, and this is one of the problems with them. Info dumps reveal way too much information at once. Revealing too much information too early means that you have nothing left to keep the reader engaged through the middle. There's no intrigue, there's no discovery. I think a lot of writers have this feeling that they need to get the reader to like an 8 out of 10 proficiency with their story before they can actually tell the story. In reality, the process of getting the reader to understand all the elements of your story through the telling of your story is a much better way to go. This is easier said than done. You need to get the reader intrigued, which means keeping them in the dark to some degree early on, and you need to make sure to reveal the information at the right pace to fill up your middle and show enough progress to keep the reader interested. If you can pull this off, though, and have a series of questions that the reader really wants to get answers to, that is enough to create a sense of progress and keep your middle from becoming mushy. It's like sit-ups for your novel. Another way to show progress through the middle is using milestones. This is when you lay out a path or a series of objectives that the story is going to move through. The archetypical example of this is something like a travel log. Here we have a destination that the characters need to reach, and to get there they need to go through this village and cross this river and go through this town and traverse this mountain pass where a dragon is rumored to live. This is great because you can give the reader an easy sense of progress as your characters get closer to their destination. You also have the opportunity to stick them in different situations, which keeps things fresh and exciting. You can lead a reader through a middle by giving them a destination that the story is heading to and showing progress as we get closer to that destination. Another example of milestones is something like a revenge story. Revenge stories often center around a certain number of people that the character wants revenge on, and you can show progress by having them move through these different vengeance appointments. There's all sorts of other milestones that you can use. Regardless of what you use for a milestone, the important thing to remember is that you need to make it clear where the story is going and give the reader some indication of the path that it's going to take to get there. Escalation is also an important factor in stories that use milestones. It's not enough just to progress the characters towards a goal. Things need to get more difficult or more challenging as they go. The journey should become more challenging, relationships should become more strained, supplies should begin to run short. As the characters get closer and closer to their goal, the stakes and challenges should increase. What you don't want is every milestone to just kind of feel like the last one, because that's just going to feel repetitive. It's not going to feel like the story is growing, and it's not going to build up tension and stakes. It's just going to feel kind of flat. You're going to lose the feeling of progress through your middle. There are probably other ways to show progress through the middle of a novel, but these are the three main ones that I could think of. And in something as complex as a novel, you're probably going to use more than one. You might have a character who is going through an arc while also going through a travel log. And that travel log maybe also reveals information about the magical department store that the hobbits are returning the piece of jewelry to. What's important is that you show change through the middle of your novel. This could be progress, it could be the characters moving towards a goal, it could be an escalation in the stakes and the challenges of the story. Change is what's important, and you want to make sure that that change is in service to your ending. Remember, the point of a middle is to cultivate your reader's interest in the plot and characters. A middle should not feel like we're waiting around or killing time or watching the clock. A middle, when well written, should be a dynamic, engaging part of your novel that adds things to it rather than just delays until we get to the ending. Speaking of dynamic and engaging, in the spirit of focusing on middles, I did not write a dynamic and engaging ending to this video. So there you have it. I'd love to hear what you think about this in the comments down below. As always, thanks for watching, and I will see you next time.